Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Saṅghāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So hope that everybody is keeping well wherever it might be. And I've come down here to Medagama, which is in Monoragala. My first time, I think, to this area ever in Sri Lanka. Kind of been heading out to the southeast and hotter and drier areas of Sri Lanka and looking at potential kuttis, potential places to stay. And this area here actually has 3 kuttis located in a kind of forest area, which I think is a proposed forest reserve behind a Raja Mahavihara. So it's a lovely environment. And so one of the themes that has been coming up recently is this kind of theme of contentment, which is basically that whatever it is that one finds oneself with in terms of the requisites, in terms of the things that one needs for getting by, for maintaining one's life from day to day, then one should develop contentment with those. And this is one of the things that the Buddha describes as a thought. One of the thoughts of a great, to say a Mahapurusha, which means a great man. The thoughts of a great man is, this Dhamma is for one who is content, not for one who is discontent. And then contentment here means contentment with any type of robes, any type of alms food, any type of lodging, and any type of medicine. Now, of course, we're going to come across situations in which the conditions are such that we just can't manage. Actually, one of the things that we use to evaluate whether our contentment is erring on the side of being too ascetic or being too frugal is if our health actually starts to decline. So I was staying up here. Just behind me is the kuti, behind the camera. And over here, it's at the top of a mountain, there's this forest area. And these kutis have been renovated. They're actually, they're quite nice, and I met the group of people who renovated these kutis. And this one here, it has clay tiles for the roof, and unfortunately I think water seeps through, so there's some mold inside of this kuti. The other 2, I think, don't have clay tile roofs. I think they have asbestos roofs, so no water seeps through. So when I went into this kuti, at first it felt fine, but then later I noticed, I have some kind of issues with mold. So I started to sleep on the bench outside, which was also fine. But then there were these rainstorms that were coming every night, and it was nice actually, kind of fun, kind of beautiful to be out in a kind of semi-protected space when it's raining. It's like a movie almost. But noticed actually that by the second day I started, my knee started to hurt, second or third. And then later I was like, why is my knee hurting? And it turned out it was because there's this kind of cold wind coming through, and it was always blowing on this right side of my body. And also kind of raining and these kind of things. So I thought, well, I better watch it. Kind of this decline in my health occurred day by day by day. As of course it's not a major thing, but if you keep staying that way, then your health will decline and you won't be able to continue staying. So I moved down to the lowest kuti, which has this asbestos roof and is enclosed and has a new bed and all these different things. So it's mold-free, basically. So one of the difficult things in a person's practice with contentment is that develop contentment for the sake of developing the mind, actually. It's for the sake of kind of being at ease in the situation that we're in, being easy to support, and also having a type of freedom. Because the more things that we require to sustain our life, the more that we have to rely on external sources to sustain our life. And that means that the more we rely on external things, the more shaky they are. One of the difficult things about developing this contentment is that it can be difficult to distinguish between when one is pushing forward and feeling painful feelings as a result of advancing, and when one is feeling painful feelings as a result of one's health declining. It may sound like something very easy to determine the difference between, actually, but it's not always so easy to determine. I remember when I was a young man, I used to go on these kind of Zen meditation retreats, and I had so much pain sitting in these retreats. It would be like 9 hours of sitting, and it was pretty strict. You couldn't move, and you get yelled at if you shifted too much by the teacher. And I decided that I was going to sit with my weak meditation leg during this retreat. And so I was sitting. My first retreat, it was the most excruciating pain that I've ever felt in my life. And of course, you have nowhere to run to. You don't have any drugs that you're taking, like morphine or something, if you're in a hospital, that will dull the pain. You're just there trying to use your meditation topic and not knowing much about meditation to combat this excruciating pain. It's the worst. So remember, that retreat might have been the worst pain, some of the worst pain I've ever been in my life. It's kind of terrible pain. And then there was a point after 2 or 3 retreats where I was pushing through this pain in my knee, and then all of a sudden I felt something shift in my knee. And after that, I never had pain in my knee, really, again. And nothing went wrong with my knee. Of course, I was in my 20s at that time. So this is a situation, and there are situations like this, dealing with illness, dealing with physical pain, in which it's really strange that the pain will suddenly completely disappear. And then one's ability to be content increases. The level at which one can rest content has increased because one has found some inner resources to combat even the physical symptoms that occur with this discontent. So in these cases, this pain is a symptom that one needs to push through. However, there are these other cases which I talked about, could talk about more. One time when I was at that same temple, I decided to sit in the full lotus position all the time, which was good. But then one time I went to pick up this very heavy computer monitor, and boom, my back kind of went out, and I was out of commission for, I think it was more than a year that really troubled me. I even had this kind of sciatica down to my ankle, and it still comes back to haunt these days, even that injury. It was kind of an example of pushing too far. So one of the difficulties with this is that involved with this contentment with little is the way that other people perceive a person. And when one is a practitioner, one is able to endure more, one is able to get by with less, then this impresses other people, actually. This can especially be the case if one is living in a culture, living in a situation, living with people who don't meditate. That's one of the ironic things. It kind of not everywhere in Buddhism, where monks are people meditating. Actually, there's some cultures where people just don't like to meditate at all. And so what tends to impress people in this case is almost like a kind of TV-like way of looking at monasticism or Buddhism. They get impressed with things which grab their attention. And of course, things that are the further they are from the norm of life, the more attention-grabbing they are, the more impressive they are. And so this gets bound up with a person's reputation. It gets bound up with the way that other people will view one, and it gets bound up with basically how much one can actually even get the requisites to support one's life. There's this kind of interesting cycle that is known about in forest traditions, where usually most forest traditions start off being pretty austere. Because the monks are poor. Any new tradition that starts is very poor. It's not wealthy at all, kind of, and people aren't that interested in it. Even sometimes they have to suffer a lot. It's ironic and strange, but historically, wherever it is that monks start to put forth effort in their meditation, there's quite a lot of resistance, often from local people, often from other people as well. It's because sometimes the monks become more withdrawn and less friendly, less engaged, and more focused on meditation. And people don't like that. It's kind of take offense at that. So this is one of the reasons that just their demeanor and the way of their practice initially actually tends to inspire resistance. It tends to inspire anger sometimes. So at the outset of these forest traditions, they have little support because they're not famous. They also have little support because they're pushing against the grain of society. And in a certain extent, this forces them to develop contentment. This forces the members of those traditions to learn to get by on very, very little. Learn to get by on just what they have. In some cases, even making the things that aren't available to them. Learning to make their bags, learning to make their robes out of scraps. Learning to get by on whatever alms food there is. I was just listening to a talk today, and it was talking about a story from Ajahn Mun, who is the founder of the forest tradition in Thailand. And it was saying that there was one range retreat he spent where he basically only got bananas in his alms bowl on alms run. And if you've ever been in some of these remote villages, it's not like your bowl is full sometimes. It's sometimes like not a large amount of food. You can just imagine if most of that is bananas, it would be difficult. He said whenever he would sometimes smell his arm, and his arm would smell like banana because of all the bananas that he'd been eating. That's actually very difficult to do if anybody has ever lived on alms in an uncertain situation, getting like a mono-type food, especially if one is older, then it has impacts on one's health. So just eating bananas for this length of time is very impressive. But monks had to learn to endure with that and do what they could, because actually there was no other option. And because this is so far out of the norm, this then starts to become impressive to people after a certain period of time. And because it's impressive, then gifts come to these traditions, and the monks lose their ability to endure, lose their ability to put up with difficulties, to put up and be content with little. However, there is a kind of balance to this actually, because it is possible, and people can and do often injure themselves trying to learn to be content. And bound up with that sometimes is the desire to look good in the eyes of other people, or are the expectations that other people have on how a monk who practices should behave, how they should live, and what they should or shouldn't be content with. So what this means is that when one comes to practice, foremost, all the time in one's own mind, what one has to have as the priority is whether or not one is developing in wholesome qualities and declining in unwholesome ones. Whether or not one is developing towards nibbana. Actually, this is the only thing that one can really keep. One can really can put more and more under one's control. The things of the world, people's reputation, their expectations of how you should behave, what you should do, what you shouldn't or shouldn't be content with, these are things that are constantly changing and kind of constantly under threat, constantly subject to competition, or subject to changing views on what it is or what it isn't, that makes a monk a good meditator in the eyes of people, sometimes often who don't meditate themselves. So because of this, whenever one comes to meditate, wherever it is that one is meditating, essentially what one will be doing is giving up more and more of the ways of the world. Giving up more and more of the means by which one gathers resources in the world. And what this means is one has to learn to rely on less. One has to learn to be content with little. But one also has to have this faculty of wisdom constantly in play to determine where is the tipping point here? Where is the tipping point where I'm actually going down a slope where I'm declining in health? Or where's the tipping point here where I've hit a good spot, and for the situation that my body's in, for the situation that my mind is in, I'm advancing at a sustainable pace, at a pace that's good, at a pace that feels right. When one has found a situation like this or a place like this, then one should persevere there. And one should learn to endure there and put up with the difficulties that come there, using whatever skillful means are available to one. And there's a lot. There's a lot of different skillful means that can be available to one. And one can learn to basically rely more and more on one's meditation practice. One can learn to even do different things with certain medicines. Actually, it's interesting, I learned here in Sri Lanka that actually turmeric powder it's almost the most effective wound healing medicine that I've ever encountered. Actually, I cut my finger the other day and I got an infection, and I put a small amount of this turmeric in there, and it's healed. It's healed as fast, or possibly even faster than this medicine, this topical antibiotic medicine that I used to use in Canada that was really excellent. And it's cheap, it's readily available. Also found that milk powder is extremely helpful for my stomach. So, milk powder is available here in Sri Lanka, and it's I don't think it's that expensive. So one can learn to manipulate the situations that one is in, or try to find avenues in the situation that one is in, so that one can sustain one's body there, so that one can sustain one's mind there. And one has to learn to be creative in these situations. But all the time, whatever it is that a person puts their mind towards practice, the things of the world have to fall away because they're not being sustained. It takes a lot of time to sustain a job, to sustain multiple, very deep relationships in one's life that are not Dhamma-based, to sustain basically all the things of the world. That takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of inputs. These things are created things. They're sankharas. They're things we put together, and if they're not maintained, they fall apart. So in order to train one's mind, one has to have more and more of this resource of time. One needs more and more time, and by putting in this resource of time, by putting in more and more hours, the things external to one's life will naturally start to deteriorate, naturally start to fall away. And what this means is that the usual ways in which one could sustain one's body, sustain one's ability to live that one was used to in the world, will be less and less available. So one has to learn to rely more and more on this faculty of contentment. Contentment with any type of food, contentment with any type of medicine, any type of lodging, within reason. One can go to any of these types of lodging, but it doesn't mean that one just has to endure there. If there's mold, then one can try to remove it. If there's alms food that one just can't eat, then one can try to find medicinal ways to counter that, kind of to get by. Because the Buddhist path of practice is one that doesn't veer towards sensuality, but it's also one that doesn't veer towards self-mortification. It's the middle way. It's the middle path between these things, something that is well balanced, something that makes it possible to move forward step by step, relying on the most important thing in our life, which is something that we can control, which is how we practice and how we train our mind. So we become content with the external things in our life so that we have this time and these resources to develop contentment in our own mind, to develop contentment with the wholesome qualities we're trying to get, to develop contentment with the Buddhist path and our development of it, to become happy in practicing this way. Because this is a path that leads to stability. More and more we turn our mind inwards, the less and less we have to worry about external things. This is a path that leads to happiness. And the thoughts of a great man is, this Dhamma is for one who's content. So this is a faculty that we can learn to try to develop. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection. And wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.